Welcome to an inspirational people interview on the Share Life podcast. I'm Jason Scott Montoya. Today I'm here with the author of Every Other Weekend, Anthony Mohr. Anthony, say hello.
Hi, thanks for having me on. It's good to be here.
Yeah. Yeah, Anthony Mohr served for 26 years as the judge on the Superior Court of California. In January 2021, he became a fellow at the Advanced Leadership Initiative at Harvard University and is now a senior editor at the Harvard, is it ALI or ALI Social Impact Review? ALI. His stories and essays have received 6 Pushcart Prize nominations. He's worked on staffs of Evening Street Review, Fifth Wednesday Journal, Hippocampus Magazine, and Under the Sun. And he now has a book. And I want to dive in. The book is really your story, as far as I can tell. I haven't had the chance to read it, but I do want to tease out some of your stories. So tell us, where should we start?
Well, it's a memoir of basically my teenage years. It's not an
Yeah,
autobiography at all. It's not
yeah.
but it's just
Oh,
basically
okay.
from the time my mother and dad divorced. I was 9 at the time. And then 2 years later, they both remarried to different people. And
Yeah.
so through high school until I left for college, I was shuttlecocking back and forth from one household to the other. They lived near each
Mm.
other in LA.
So what year was that?
Well, they divorced in 1956. They
Okay.
remarried in 1958. This is a time when divorce was very, very rare and not
Yeah.
heard, and it wasn't well received either. But in any
Mm.
case, they both remarried. My father was an actor. He had appeared on a number of TV shows, often playing the bad guy.
What was his name? And for anyone that's familiar with that era, what are some of the things he was in?
His name was Gerald Mohr, and he was in radio before TV. He played Philip Marlowe on the radio. That was his big name to fame
Okay.
on the radio, but he was in something like 500 radio plays. And then
Wow.
he appeared on lots of Westerns, Gunsmoke, Maverick, Outlaw, Cheyenne,
Okay.
The Rifleman, and we can keep going.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, my mom's cousin, he's in his 60s and he's in a retired home, and whenever we go over there, Rifleman is playing, like he watches it over and over.
Chuck was a nice guy. I was a lawyer before I became a judge, obviously, and he was a
Okay.
client. So Chuck
Yeah.
and I knew each other pretty well. And I
Okay, wow.
enjoyed his company. We used to hang out together and sometimes go out and have dinner. And I'd see people come running up to him and ask for his autograph. It was fun.
Okay. Now, what was it like being a kid? Like, did you understand what was going on, or were you just kind of living your life as a normal kid?
I was living my life as a normal kid. It
Yeah.
didn't feel special, if you will, because he was
Mm.
an actor, that he was known.
Yeah.
He was just, and I went to a school where there were lots of children of celebrities and much better known celebrities than my father.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
we didn't walk around going, "Oh my God, there's Danny Kaye's daughter," or
Yeah.
"There's Lee J. Cobb's daughter." We didn't do
Mm.
that. They were just other kids in the school,
Yeah.
and we didn't venerate them, revere them, worship them. They were just kids like
Yeah.
us,
Yeah.
because there were so many of them. It didn't really strike me that this was a rarefied or a unique environment until I left high school and got into college, and people
Mm.
started saying, "Oh, what's it like to live in Beverly Hills?"
Yeah.
For me, it was
Yeah.
like, the fish doesn't really know what the water is. They're just living in water. It's the
Yeah.
same kind of thing.
Yeah. What's water?
And then the other side of it, my mother's second husband was a very conservative businessman, an entrepreneur. And he was very successful in what he did. His best known claim to fame was that he built the machines that imprinted and embossed credit cards.
Okay.
And
Is that the thing
made
that you slide it over the credit card, like the slider thing?
that's the imprinting. The
Okay.
embosser was the one that put your name on the credit card. It would say
Okay.
Jason Montoya, number 53485 or something like that.
Okay. And
And
what year was that?
that was again 1958, 59,
So there were
1960.
credit cards that far back.
Oh yeah, oh
Yeah.
yeah. There were. I mean, initially I think it started with Diners Club, uh, but it became popular around 60, I think, with the Bank America card. And
Okay.
my stepdad, Stan, made the machines that imprinted and embossed the Bank America card. He worked with the Bank of
Okay.
America to do that. Bank America card is now Visa, so you can see what
Oh,
the
wow.
trajectory is.
Yeah.
So
And
they were
what
very,
was, like,
sorry,
who had credit cards during that era? Was it pretty normal, or was it just like rich people or
it was
famous people?
people well off.
Yeah.
Mad Magazine, I'll never forget this. They did a spoof on credit cards, and they had a panel where this, rich guy with a mustache and white hair is flashing $100 bills at everybody. And then
Mm.
in the next panel, the same guy is flashing credit cards at everybody. Yeah, credit cards were not as everyday as they are now.
Yeah.
But with the
So,
Bank America card, it became more ubiquitous, if you
mm,
will.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty wild. So tell us a little bit more about him. So he invents this technology, I guess,
Yeah,
or
and
what he's.
he was very, very conservative. Um, much more of a disciplinarian than my father was. My dad was very live and
Mm,
let live, and let's have fun,
okay.
and live the good life and be out there. And Stan felt, you had to work. Kids have to
Mm,
work, quote unquote. He said children shouldn't have that much fun,
oh,
um,
okay.
which struck me at the time as something I didn't want to hear and didn't sound
Yeah. No kid
pleasant.
wants to hear that.
Right, exactly. Um, he was very political. He,
Yeah.
had come from Michigan, and they helped get Gerald Ford on his way. He and a group
Oh,
of other
wow.
business people. And
Yeah.
out here, he had connections with Richard Nixon. In fact, Nixon asked him to join his administration in
Wow.
the Department of Transportation, and Stan said no, he wanted to be his own boss, have his own
Yeah.
company. But he
Mm,
did very well, was very successful, very rich. By
yeah.
contrast, my father, even though he was well known, wasn't rich. In fact, money was very tight.
Mm,
Following the divorce, he really didn't make that much money at all. There weren't such
yeah.
things as residuals, or if they were
Hmm.
minor. And
Yeah.
he was scrounging for his dollars.
Yeah.
So at one weekend, I'm in a family that's not that is worried about their money. "Quote unquote," money is tight. That was my dad's phrase. The
Yeah.
next weekend, I'm with my stepdad. He's on a 58-foot catamaran that he built for us. Lives in a great house in Beverly Hills. He had a place down in Newport Beach for a while. Everything was up roses, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's quite a contrast. You have this guy, you have these two men that are essentially because you're going back and forth because of the
Right,
divorce, right?
right.
And one is strict and very financially well off, and the other is very kind of loose. And it almost seems like you're bipolar in a way of like every weekend you're one and then you're other. How did that affect you?
It's the best preparation you can have for becoming a judge. Now, back
Wow,
then, I had no thoughts about becoming a judge at all. It never
wow,
really struck me until I was sort of out of law school. And even
yeah,
then, I saw it as something out of reach because I didn't know the governor, I didn't know the president. And those are the
yeah,
people who appoint the judges.
mm,
So, but looking back, it prepares you because you're dealing with two different cultures. It's like spending
mm,
one weekend in Japan, the next weekend in Spain,
yeah,
and getting along.
okay, yeah,
But at the time, I was just trying to live my life. And
mm,
often over at my father's, because his second wife was not the nicest person to me.
mm,
We didn't get on that well. And I
yeah,
think she was disappointed. She married a guy who she thought was going to be a big, wealthy Hollywood star. And he may have been a Hollywood
yeah,
starlet, if you will, or a mini star, but he wasn't wealthy. And I think she was disappointed, but she was always
mm,
talking about not having money. And
yeah,
so I'm over there and thinking, God, I wish I were back with my mother and Stan. Then I'd get
yeah,
over to my mother and Stan's, and Stan would be lecturing about how kids should work. You're not working hard enough. You're a spoiled
mm,
brat. And I'm thinking, I
yeah,
really wish I were back over at my father's, because he liked
yeah.
fun together.
Yeah, yeah. But did that instill some I think in terms of raising kids, I got five of them. So my
Okay.
oldest is 15, my youngest is 6. So, but in terms of like parenting, like we can only do so much as a parent. I think in a lot of ways our kids have to, from my own experience, we have to learn from other people as well. So,
Right.
were there things that what were kind of some of the things you learned from him that even though you didn't necessarily like his strictness, what were there some things that were really valuable to you as you became an adult?
Oh, sure. Just
Yeah.
basically stick to itiveness,
Yeah.
keep
Okay.
going.
Yeah.
Stan just felt if you're knocked down, get up and keep on going.
Yeah.
Don't let them keep you down.
Yeah.
Fight your way back. Stan was not born into wealth or anything. He was self-made, and
Yeah.
so that was certainly a lesson to be learned.
Mm.
And then there were lots of little lessons along the way in terms of handling business, um, and how to handle yourself in a negotiation. Stan
Yeah.
was sold several companies, including the one that made the credit cards, and he would
Mm.
negotiate with these very large corporations. The first one was Hughes Dynamics, and
Okay.
he walked out of the negotiations twice. He said, "I'm sorry, we just can't make a deal." Pack up his little briefcase and walk out.
Yeah.
And they'd come back and say, "Well, wait a minute now." They'll call him. "We've got some other ideas. Let's talk some more." And I
Mm.
never thought about that. I never thought, God, that's not how you negotiate. If somebody says no to you, they say no and you walk away. I
Yeah.
never realized no can mean yes. No can mean
Mm.
let's talk some more.
Yeah.
And Stan taught that to me.
Yeah. Well, there's also something there too about the idea of like having nothing to lose, like not being held hostage.
Right.
to a deal that you don't want. So dive into that idea some for
Well,
us.
I love the phrase from, I think it was Janet Joplin, freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose.
Oh,
And,
okay, yeah.
Stan, when he was negotiating, sometimes he had all his net worth on the table. And
Hmm.
he had told my mother before they got married, I could be a rich man or I could be a poor man. And I
Yeah.
want you to know that before you and I get
Mm,
married. And she
yeah.
bought into that. And there are a couple of times Stan really didn't have enough money to make the payroll, but darn it, he just, said, okay, if I lose, I lose. I'm throwing it
Yeah.
all in, and things worked out for him.
Yeah. 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 Now, how did, with your parents being divorced, like give us kind of, help us understand the context of, like you mentioned, it was looked down upon. So how was it, particularly in society, but also in your part of the country? How was it seen, and did that have any unique effect on you as the child of that divorce?
Fortunately, it did not have an effect on me. Nobody teased me. Nobody, uh, you know, criticized me. As far as I know, no girl refused to go out with me, at least as far as I know.
Yeah.
Maybe their parents said, "Hey, he's from a divorced family. Don't go see him." But I
Yeah.
never knew about that. I don't think it happened. I
Hmm.
was in with a very good group of friends. They were all, quote, well behaved, got good grades, and I really wanted to belong to that kind of a group. I was lucky not to fall into the wrong crowd. Many times children
Yeah.
of divorce go the other way. I was fortunate not to. I'm sure my mother was a force behind that. But
Yeah.
so I know, though, that divorce was very rare. In my crowd,
Yeah.
I was the only child of a, quote, broken home. At the time,
Mm,
that phrase was well used. Now you don't hear it anymore because
yeah.
half the world is coming from a blended family. But
Hmm.
back then, no. But people were
Yeah.
really, there were people who really would look down on someone who walked out of a marriage. My father
Hmm.
lost a lot of friends when
Mm,
the divorce happened. A number of people
yeah.
just said, that's it. And he was very
Uh,
close with them. And then they
did
walked
they
away.
did they even take the time to understand the situation?
I don't know. I was too
Okay.
young and I didn't ask those questions. Frank
Yeah.
Sinatra got a divorce, and I forget who it was. I mention it in the book, but some woman literally refused to play his records after that. She
Oh
was
wow.
so angry at him. A couple of my father's very close friends basically sided with my mother, and that was it. They wouldn't talk to him anymore.
Mm. But did they do any kind of a like time? Did they spend any time to like get both sides of the story and understand the situation,
I
or they
doubt
just kind
it.
of make?
I
Yeah.
doubt it, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
really don't know. But that's how divorce is. People side.
Yeah.
It really did. And they sided galore back in the late 50s, early 60s. So, as I said, my dad lost a lot of friends in this situation.
Yeah.
But my
So how
parents
did
were
it?
very good at not criticizing each other. My
Okay.
mother wouldn't sit down and say, "Oh, your father was an ogre and a monster." And my
Yeah.
father never said that about my mother. They talked about the divorce. They said a few things about them,
Yeah.
especially as I got older. Once I was in my late teens and onward, I
Yeah.
started to hear more of the story. But when I was 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, they were very careful not to put each other down.
That's good.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's I think if it's going to happen, that's definitely a way to proceed, I think. I mean, if someone's a kid and their parents are going through that now, what advice would you give to that person
um,
in terms of
to the
like
kid
how
or to the parents?
for the kid? Well, how about both? We'll start with the kid. What would you tell that kid?
Advice to the kid? Well, it's easier now because you're going to have
Yeah.
friends who are also coming from divorcing families. So
Yeah.
don't be afraid to open up to your friends, talk about how you feel, share their feelings, and just, kind of work together to kind of get through this because you will
Yeah.
get through it and understand that the parents are not divorcing because of you. They're divorcing
Yeah.
because of something with each other.
Yeah.
As I said, it should be easier these days to adapt.
Yeah.
For me, I was kind of the Lone Ranger. I didn't know anybody except one kid who did come from a divorced family, and he was very
Mm.
maladjusted. He was brilliant. He was clever. Had a fabulous, rapid fire, piercing wit, but
Yeah.
he could also be very unpleasant. He got into trouble all the time at school, and as a result, I tried to limit the friendship. But he lived very
Mm.
close to me. He literally lived on the same block when we first moved back to Beverly Hills.
Yeah.
But he was a difficult, disturbed kid.
Yeah.
Advice to the parents:
Yeah.
get the kid into therapy. The
Mm.
child may feel totally fine, totally adjusted, doesn't feel as if something's wrong.
Yeah.
Go get the
Hmm.
kid into therapy. I wish somebody had done that with me. But back
Yeah.
then, if you went to see a psychologist, everybody thought you were crazy.
There was
Oh my
just
God, he's
the
a
stigma.
psychologist. What's wrong with him?
Yeah.
So, but
Yeah.
it would
So
have been
what
very
ha
helpful.
and the reason for that is I assume if you bury it down, like you have to process it. So, but if
Yep,
you bury it down, then it comes out in other places. Is that kind of the
of
general?
course, of
Yeah.
course. I mean, it'll dormant. As they say, it'll sound and stay sounded somewhere until it comes back at whatever age that will be.
Yeah. Yeah. So the book is trekking your story through this. I guess like what's the beginning and end year of the story in the
Well, the
book?
beginning is basically happy days with my dad as I'm a child. He
Yeah.
got me on a TV, a kids panel show. We went horseback riding
Okay.
together. We did some
Yeah.
hiking up at Vasquez Rocks, which was a great park, still is, and a location for a number of his westerns.
Mm,
I remember listening in on some of the parties he had where all their industry friends came by. I would sit
okay.
at the head of the stairs and listen to all these people cracking jokes and having a
Yeah.
wonderful time together. Um,
Yeah.
and then suddenly, with no warning at all, they sat me down and told me they were splitting up.
Mm,
And my father was leaving my mother to marry a woman that he met in Sweden. We had been there for a year when he was filming a show, a TV series, which
oh
he never
wow.
should have accepted. He never should have taken that serious. But he did. Taking it actually meant he turned down the lead in Wyatt Earp
Oh wow.
because he
So
wanted to
he
live in
missed out
Europe.
on an opportunity because of it.
Huge miss out. I mean, Hugh O'Brien
Yeah.
got the part next, and the series that he jumped into, which was the third year, failed. I mean, it was on the
Mm,
air for 1 year and then went away. But he met
yeah.
the script supervisor, and they fell in love or whatever, and he ditched my mother for her. So
Wow. And
anyway,
how? Yeah. And so where does so the book kind of treks through that? Where does it go from there?
it goes then it goes to the remarriage. Part two is the remarriage,
Okay.
and I inherited a brother and a sister in the bargain,
Oh wow.
which was
Yeah.
good.
What age difference were they
Skip was
for you?
5 years older. Leslie was 2 years younger.
Hmm.
So I came right in the middle. Skip and I got
Mm,
on fine. Leslie and I had some sibling rivalry. When you're
yeah.
9 and, I'm 9, 11, she's 9, I'm not that interested in her. Come
Yeah.
on, she's a little kid. I don't want to be around her. But we
Yeah.
grew very close. We still are to this day, both of them.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
we started having parties and mixing our groups together because she still went to high school over in Van Nuys because she
Hmm.
stayed with her mother against
Hmm.
her wishes. But Stan said, "Look, you've got to stay with your mother,"
Yeah.
who was a problem as well.
Mm.
But in any case, we'd have parties and Leslie would bring her girlfriends, I'd bring the guys. And actually one marriage came out of it and they're
Oh
still
wow.
married.
You were a matchmaker.
She was more than me, but yeah,
Oh okay.
the two of them got married and they're still married. I talked to them about 3 months ago. So
Yeah.
there you are.
Wow.
There you
Yeah. How
are.
long have they been married?
Oh God, they got married over 50 years ago now.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
So
pretty wild. All right. So part two. What else happens in part two? And is there a
part
part
two
three?
is basically the every other weekend.
Okay.
I wrote it in scenes. One
Yeah.
weekend here, Skip and I are having fun. We're listening to the radio. I'm, top 40 radio, which I didn't know about until Skip came along.
Yeah.
Next weekend over at my father's, I remember one of the times we went to the showing of one of his movies, The Angry Red Planet. It was an interesting little.
What year was that?
That was like 1959, I believe.
Okay. Yeah.
And so, we all went to it. It was at a theater that was kind of seedy. The movie
Mm,
was kind of a cult flick, but it didn't do that well. Um,
yeah.
but I wrote about that. Next
Yeah.
weekend back with Stan on the boat, his boat. We're over at Catalina.
Okay.
Following weekend back at my father's. Maya's having a hissy fit because they don't have money. It was sort
Hmm.
of back and forth, back and forth.
Yeah. So you kind of got the pros and cons of both sides.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
One chapter that takes place in high school with my father missing. He just sort of took off for a few
Oh
days and
wow.
nobody knew where he went.
You didn't tell
Did
anyone?
that because he was sick and tired of mine. He just wanted to be alone for a few days. I think he was with some other woman because he
Mm-hmm.
definitely was not a faithful husband. He was out there.
Yeah.
He was.
Yeah. How did that affect you? Or did it really did you
It
really
did,
comprehend
and I've
what?
got 2 chapters about that because one of the women, Miriam, was really attached to him, and he used me
Yeah.
as sort of an excuse to get out of the house. I'm having lunch
Mm,
with Tony, and he would have lunch with me, and then Miriam would show up.
yeah.
And then they'd go off and do their thing. And
Okay.
I wasn't quite sure what was happening. I was very naive.
Mm,
But Miriam, eventually he broke up with her. And she
yeah.
called me. I was away at USC at a debating institute that summer. And she called me and said she was going to kill herself if my father didn't take her back.
Oh wow.
And that
Why did she
was
call you? Try and manipulate the situation?
that's the question all America's asking itself. I'm not quite sure why she called me. I guess she was just desperate for a way back. And
Yeah.
she figured I'm a
Yeah.
path back to, back to her Jerry. And
Yeah.
that was very upsetting. So I write
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. That's pretty horrible.
Yeah. And then I write about life in West LA and Beverly Hills, going to the beach, some parties, buying clothes,
Yeah.
because my
What
dad
would you say is yeah, what would you say is distinct about that area? Like for people that maybe haven't been there or haven't spent a lot of time there, what's so unique about it from your point of view?
Well, life was easy back then. LA was its own little place, cut off from the rest of the world, if you will. To get there, you had to cross mountain ranges and deserts, and it wasn't just a quick plane ride. Although starting around 1961 or 62, it was. But before
Yeah.
that, it took 8 hours to fly across the country, and
Yeah.
or if you're going to drive across deserts and all sorts of things. So, we were our own place. Beverly Hills was a very small town. It was a Mayberry in the middle of LA. It was surrounded by Los Angeles, but it was a small town. And
Yeah.
yes, there were lots of stars there, but we gave them their space. We didn't jump up and down if we saw one. Like Doris Day would walk down to one of the drugstores, I forget which one, every day and get herself some ice cream or something.
Yeah.
She'd hand out candy on Halloween, as did many other celebrities. They were just
Did she give
there.
a lot of candy or did she keep it pretty minimal?
I think she gave out a lot. She did. So it's just, and then you had the beach culture.
Yeah.
Everybody was surfing. I wasn't. I would body surf, but I never learned to get up on a board. But the
Mm,
surfers were kind of idolized in the high school society,
okay.
if you will. And what else? The car culture. LA began the car culture. You had lots and lots of places here that would where you could buy parts easily. The streets are
Hmm.
very long, long boulevards, multi-lane, even the surface streets. So it was a great place to race, drag race, carry on. People got their hot rods and their muscle cars, their flame jobs, drove all over the place, and then they sang songs about it, especially the
Yeah.
Beach Boys and the Hondells and other groups. And that culture spread around the country.
Yeah.
But we
Yeah.
were the home for it.
So what would, you've been there for so long, like how has it changed since when you were a kid to now?
Completely, completely. We had no paparazzi in Beverly Hills back then. Now you do.
Okay. Yeah.
Beverly Hills at the time, Rodeo Drive was a small street. It had, a little Hawaiian restaurant called the Luau. You had
Yeah.
small stores. You had an FW Woolworths. You'd go and get a Coke there or something like that.
Yeah.
You didn't have places like Tommy Hilfiger, Ted Lapidus. You didn't have Gucci. You didn't have what we have now, which are extremely expensive outlets and
Yeah.
people coming in to kind of be part of the action, see all the stars.
Yeah.
You just didn't have that. It was like going into a little town somewhere and Iowa or, wherever and walking around and people are just being people.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that a rotary phone I hear in the background?
You hear a landline, which I'm
A
ignoring. It's
landline.
loud. It's 2 rooms over, but I'm going to ignore it.
Oh, so you still have a landline. That's an
I know
antique
we
there,
have a landline,
right?
but I almost never give it out. Here's my phone here.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. Now, what else, what's a couple other highlights from the book that we haven't already teased out here?
I mean, there's just a lot. There's one scene which was very, very hard to write where Stan and
Yeah.
I got into a fight.
Okay.
He wanted me to clean up the kitchen. I had come home
Mm,
from a Friday night activity in school, and I had eaten some Jello and left the plate in the sink. Other than that, the kitchen was immaculate. And Stan and my mom are in bed, and we're talking, and I'm sharing what happened during the day. And then out of the blue, he said, "Go clean up the kitchen." And I said, "Well, there's only one plate in the sink." And he sprang out of bed and grabbed me, and he started hitting me. And he said,
oh,
"You go
wow.
clean up that kitchen." And I was shocked. Actually, I hit back, and it turned into a fight.
Wow.
And I was very, very upset by it. I mean, to this day, I'm not quite sure what prompted this.
Yeah.
My mother ran interference. She was there when it happened, and she actually got us back together again. Um, the following night, we had dinner together. That was a Saturday night, and
Mm,
she and Stan really wasn't talking, nor was I. And she said,
hmm.
"Well, do either of you have anything to say to each other?"
Yeah.
And I said, "All right, I'll admit that I'm wrong, but if you have to admit you're wrong too." And
Yeah.
he did, and we shook
Yeah.
hands. But,
Wow.
I never really got over it, which is
Mm,
why I put it in the book. Never
Yeah.
quite understood that. And when you, beyond that, going beyond that chapter, you said, what else is in the book? I never really planned to put my mother into the pages, but she kept
Mm.
popping up there
Yeah.
because she really was the unsung hero of the story. She was the
Yeah.
one who ran interference with both fathers. With a problem with Miriam, she's the one who called my father and said, look, you can do whatever you want with any of your girlfriends, but you're not going to bring my son into it. And with Stan, when he was talking about how you have to work all the time, she said, look, he's having a good time in high school. He's enjoying his friends. He's happy for the first time in many years because of the divorce. He's busy debating. He's writing for the paper. You're not going to take him away from that to go work at your office. So she was very, very helpful in kind of keeping me going where I wanted to go.
Yeah. What were some of the key values that she held that you inherited or that you adopted or
In
embraced?
education, she believed, and she was, she had not gone to school. She was a depression
Yeah.
child. She worked after
Okay.
high school. She never took another class, never went to college, although she took classes as an adult. Uh,
Yeah.
but she said, look, you've got to do well. You've got to study. You've got to do well. She was very friendly to everybody. I don't care who you were. You could be, the lowest, laborer, or you could be the CEO of a major corporation. And many CEOs of big companies came to the house. In fact, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff came to visit, Arthur Radford.
Oh,
Stan met him, and they actually were on the board of a company together. But whoever
yeah.
came, she treated them all equally.
Yeah.
Everybody got equal respect. And I think that was definitely a lesson learned.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
So
People
who
loved her, by the way. Jason,
yeah.
people loved her. People would come up to me and say, your mother was wonderful.
Yeah.
She was acquired her own culture. And
Yeah, that's wild.
which turned into a problem when I became an adult because no woman I went out with who met her thought she was good enough for me. In other words, she would say,
Uh,
your mother doesn't think I'm good enough for you. I don't want to see you anymore because your mother will never approve. This happened
yeah.
over and over and over
Oh
again.
wow. So you had to go out of LA to find a woman? Is that what happened?
No, the woman was out of LA, but she came here.
Oh, okay.
She came
Now,
here.
how did your mom end up in LA?
Well, my father came out here to work in radio and somewhat in
Okay.
movies at the time. That was in the mid to late 30s. And they had
Oh,
known each
okay.
other in high school. And then he called her and said, look, I have $750 in the bank. Take the super chief and come out and let's get married.
Oh, wow.
She did it.
Wow. So she didn't know the train she was getting on.
Yeah, she had no idea.
Yeah.
No idea.
So who would be a good person to read the book? Like if you're like, hey, you'd be interested in this book if you're this person. Describe that person for us.
Well, the first person would be any classmate of mine from school.
Yeah.
Okay. The second person would be anybody our age, my age, not yours. You look a lot younger
Yeah.
than I am.
Yeah.
But, some baby boomer.
Okay. Yeah.
Who kind of grew up at the time, maybe in the place, but even if not in California, somebody would want to read about that time, that culture. And
Yeah.
finally, which is interesting, but in some of the readings at bookshops that I've had, younger kids who want to know what it was like back there.
Yeah.
What was it like to come of age with the Beach Boys, or to come of age with surfers, or to come of age with all the hot rodders?
Yeah.
This is a book to read because I try to write about that and light up the culture. And I'm told I
Yeah.
did. I'm told I succeeded in doing it.
That's cool. Yeah. Well, I want to kind of pull out some of your life lessons and insights. And so when you think about just the idea of living better or working smarter, when you hear those phrases, what do they mean for you? Like, what does it mean to live better?
Please other people. You do what you want to do. To work
Okay.
smarter, do something where you feel you're good at it. Okay.
Mm.
If you don't like your boss, quit. Don't worry about
Okay.
the inability to find another job. You will find another job.
Yeah.
Stan came of age in the 30s with the Depression, and he said to a couple of bosses, take this job and shove it. And he ultimately found plenty of work.
Yeah.
So, and now, of course, we may not be a full employment economy, but we have, there are lots of jobs out there. And I would say, don't be afraid. If you've got a bad boss, walk away. I made that mistake when I started practicing law. I joined a firm, a second law firm, and it became clear to me on the first and second day that the managing partner was just a first-class jerk.
Yeah.
I could say some other words, but I won't.
Yeah.
And I remember coming home and almost in tears. I remember Stan said, give him notice, walk away. And I didn't do that. I lasted another couple of months. And finally, I left it. But by then the relationship had become poisonous.
Yeah.
I should have walked out the second day. I really should have. And
Yeah.
I was just, I was too craven, too nervous to do that. So,
Yeah.
work smarter. If it's not working out, if you're not enjoying the day, get the heck out.
Yeah. Did you, after that event, were you able to live that out in subsequent situations,
I
or did
went
it
out on
take a
my own.
while?
I decided to
Yeah.
practice law alone. So I set up my own
Okay.
office and did that all the way until 1994 when Governor Pete Wilson put me on the bench.
Okay. And what was that like?
Lovely. Being a judge was, for me, it was nirvana. It's the
Yeah.
chance to make a difference, chance to quote unquote do the right thing, not worry about what other people think of you. You're not
Yeah.
going to get sued for malpractice. You're going to get paid regardless
Yeah.
of the result. And you're trying to follow the law. Wherever the law takes you, you follow it. So
Yeah.
I found it, and still do because I still sit part-time. I
Yeah.
found it to be a great fit. Now, a lot of my
Yeah.
friends who are lawyers would never want to be a judge, and they tell me that. They
Yeah.
said, look, no way, I can't make those decisions. I don't want to sit through trials and be with boring people and all of that.
Yeah.
I respect that. But for
Yeah.
me, this has just been a much more of a pleasure and
Yeah.
much more fulfilling.
Hmm. Yeah. One thing I guess I would ask you, since you're a judge, is I feel like we're in an era where the law, we don't appreciate the importance of the law and justice. And what would you tell the people, like, how would you tell them why it's important and why we should value it and cherish it and not take it for granted?
Because if you're not living in a rules-based society, who governs? Is
Hmm.
it the law of the jungle? Is it,
Hmm.
loyalty to one person who decides
Hmm.
what he or she wants to do, and you better go, you better play along, or you're through.
Yeah.
You need a rule of law,
Hmm.
and that rule of law has to apply to everybody. I don't care who
Yeah.
you are. The CEO
Yeah.
of the company, the president of the United States, the governor of the state. The law
Yeah.
applies to everybody, and nobody is above it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think this kind of ties into that. Really, the next question is about mentoring. And,
Sure.
what do you think about the idea of mentoring? How's it played a part in your life, both as the mentee and mentoring others, but also being mentored by
Well, I was
others?
fortunate to have a couple of mentor judges, and they were
Mm,
very, generous with their time, and they would give me
yeah.
advice, let me know when I'm falling off the rails or something.
Yeah.
And that's golden. You want that kind of advice. You want that feedback, if you will.
Hmm.
And then people would, call me and say, hey, how can I become a judge, or how should I handle my cases? And I was always delighted to help because,
Yeah.
if you've been successful, you want to pay that forward and
Yeah.
make other people understand as best they can what they ought to do or not do. And the
Yeah.
times that I would have lunch or with somebody and give them that advice, I always felt very good at the end. Felt like,
Yeah.
yeah, this is worthwhile. Time well
Yeah.
spent.
Yeah.
I remember there was one judge who I appeared in front of when he was on the municipal court, again when he was on the superior court, again when he was on the Court of Appeal. He was one of
Yeah.
our best known judges. Norm Epstein was his name. And then I was asked, and Norm asked me to sit pro tem on the Court of Appeal with him. And so I did. I spent 5 months handling a couple of cases. And I
Mm.
remember the first time we had oral argument, and I'm sitting up on that bench with Norm. I'm thinking, my God, I started all the way down at the bottom as a solo practitioner, just trying to make a go of it, appearing in front of this guy who seemed brilliant at the time and was. And,
Yeah.
he taught me at Judicial College. And now, years later, we're next to each other as colleagues, albeit for me temporarily, as I was a pro
Yeah.
tem, not a permanent member of the court. But it was a very heady feeling.
Yeah. So here's your moment to speak to that aspiring judge or someone that's on the cusp of becoming one of those judges. What's the advice you would give to them?
Well, the first quality that anybody's going to look for is temperament, okay? You're going to get into squabbles and disagreements with opposing counsel,
Yeah.
but don't lose your temper. Don't scream at them. Don't threaten them. Don't get personal with them. And if they get personal and threaten you, just, kind of lean back and relax and say, okay, I appreciate your comments, but, I'm going to tell you right now, that's not what the law says, or I'm going to tell you right now, my client won't do that.
Yeah.
And if you insist, I can ask the court for sanctions, but, don't yell at me. And if they
Yeah.
start screaming in a deposition or something, you can always say, sir, you finished? You're not going to yell at me anymore? Can we
Yeah.
talk about the merits of this case without having temper tantrums?
Yeah.
Just stay calm. Temperament is all important. The next thing, if you want to be a judge, is be prepared. Walk
Yeah.
into court knowing your case and knowing what the law says. Don't wing it, because we'll know if you're winging it. And judges gossip. In the lunchroom, we gossip, and somebody will say, "Oh, do you remember that guy who was in my court? He didn't know what he was talking about." Someone,
Yeah.
"Oh, yeah, I remember him. He was in my court, 2 months ago."
Yeah.
He had no clue what was going on.
Mm,
As opposed to, "Hey, I had this lawyer in my court today, and she's fabulous.
yeah.
She's so good. If I ever get into trouble, I'm going to hire her."
Yeah.
And I've said both in the lunchrooms, and others too. So,
Yeah.
you want to be a judge, that's what you need to do. Know the law, be prepared, have the right temperament, and then, unfortunate but true, you really need somebody to go to bat for you with the governor. Someone who knows the governor, or if you want to be a federal judge, knows the president, knows your senator, who can, will recommend you to the White House.
Yeah.
You've got to have somebody like that. And,
Yeah.
there are many ways to get there. One is bar politics and bar activities. Another is politics itself. Um,
Yeah.
Doing something, to hopefully connect with somebody who will have that influence for you.
Yeah. Advocate for you on your
Yeah.
behalf.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about stories. How have stories, narratives shaped you as a person? Are there any that you kind of really resonate with,
Oh,
either
golly.
now or
That's a hard question to answer, but I'll try. Believe it or not, it's a midbrow book, but Marjorie Morningstar by Herman Wouk had an
Okay.
impact, because there's a character named Wally Ronkin. And
Yeah.
Wally Ronkin always liked Marjorie, but they didn't get together. And the book
Mm.
ends with Wally Ronkin visiting her after she's been married, and she's a housewife and maybe a little frumpy, and she's no longer the Marjorie Morningstar who wanted to be the star.
Yeah.
And he says, "I'm the only one who remembers who she was, the only one who remembers the real Marjorie Morningstar."
Yeah.
And that always got to me. Always
What
got to me.
about it
Well,
resonates?
there are a couple of people I knew back in high school, one of which was a wannabe girlfriend. And she's changed. Things have not worked out for her. And, I've seen her the last time probably 5 years ago. And, somebody, I would never ask her for a date now, even if I were single. But I remember that. I think I'm the only one who remembers what she was like. I'm the only one who remembers her in high school, this happy, successful, bright little girl, quote unquote, who had the whole world going for her. And
Yeah.
so Wally Ronkin is a person I remember. Who else? Oh golly, Michael Henchard and the mayor of Casterbridge. Somebody who
Okay.
made a horrible decision early in his life. Horrible. He auctioned off his wife and daughter.
Wow.
Literally. I mean, this takes place obviously couple of centuries ago. But he
Yeah.
auctions off the wife and daughter. And at the time, he's very poor, has no money. He then becomes extremely successful, and he becomes the mayor of Casterbridge. But things start happening, and the former wife shows up, the daughter shows up, and at the end of the day, he can't get away from what he did. And at the end, he writes his own epitaph, which is, "Keep my name off the headstone, keep my name out of everything, totally forget me, I never existed."
Wow.
Yeah. Kind of a lesson
So,
learned.
yeah, I think one of the words that comes to mind is the word regret.
Yeah, perfect. Perfect.
You're further along in your journey. You have lived a lot of life. So people that might be I'm 40, but people that are my age or younger, or maybe even your age, we don't want to live with regret. So what advice would you give to those people on how to live a life without regret?
Well, again, do your job well. Do what you think you're good at. You can be funny. That's
Yeah.
okay. You can be funny. In fact, I think that's a good recipe for a good marriage as well.
Yeah.
George Marshall, who was the head of the Marshall Plan,
Yeah.
he was very kind of soft-spoken. He didn't try to upstage anybody. He just did his job. He wanted to be the supreme commander of Allied forces in Europe during World War II.
Oh, wow.
And of course, Roosevelt had Eisenhower there as under consideration. Marshall never asked Eisenhower for the job. Had he, Eisenhower would have appointed him, but he didn't do it. He just said, and Eisenhower said, "Who should this be? Who should I pick?" And Marshall didn't say, "Please pick me." He said, "Mr. President, that's your job. I'm not going to advise you on that. You pick whoever you think is the right person." And Roosevelt picked Eisenhower. and said, George, we need you back here in Washington. I need you nearby where I can get, advice from you. And Marshall saluted and went to work. He's an absolute soaring success at what he did.
Yeah.
But he didn't get what he wanted, but he was okay with that. He accepted that and continued to do wonderful work, and then pulled out of retirement for the Marshall Plan.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's something to be said about how do we act and react when we don't get what we want.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes if somebody says no, that's not really no.
Yeah.
That's like, no, try again. Try again.
Yeah.
That happens in schools. My college turned me down when I first applied.
Oh, wow.
And I reapplied and they took me.
Okay.
And there have been a number of literary journals that said no to me. I tried them again and they said yes.
Yeah.
So no doesn't mean no all the time.
Yeah. And sometimes persistence is how you open the door.
No can mean this time no.
Yeah.
And the next piece of advice is if you want something, ask for it. George Marshall aside, ask for it. People who run for elective office usually don't know this, although the ones who do well do. And that is, if you want votes, you ask for them. If you say to somebody, sir, will you vote for me?
Yeah.
The chances are very good they're going to say yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I know you got to go in a few minutes, so why don't we wrap it up here? And what final words of wisdom do you have for us before we close?
Oh, gosh. Other than what I've said, just live your life as best you can. Take what you've learned and try to apply it. As I said before, I'll say it again. Don't get stuck trying to please everybody. Don't get stuck doing something that you really don't want to do because you think it's going to get better. Move on.
Yeah.
Move on. And that would include even a bad marriage. There's nothing inherently evil about a divorce. Some people make mistakes and they should acknowledge it and, try again.
Yeah. Well, I think the key there is humility, to admit that. So tell us a little bit about humility.
Well, you said it better than I can. You admit the mistake. You admit the mistake and try to rectify it. Try to do better.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story with us, Anthony. Where can people find you? Do you have a website? I met the book's probably on Amazon and so forth.
The book is on Amazon every other weekend, and the subtitle is Coming of Age with Two Different Dads. So it's on Amazon. You just Google my name, Anthony Mohr, M-O-H-R, and the book, or even my own name in the book should pop up. I do have a website. It's www.anthonyjmohr.com. All one word there, AnthonyJMohr.com.
Right.
The book's also available on Barnes & Noble, Thrift Books, IndieBound. It's out there. It's out there. And if you go on my website and you want to get in touch with me, there's a contact place. You click on that. I'll get your contact and get your message. And I'm also on social media: Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, so you can find me. I'm not hiding out.
Yeah. Well, if any of this resonates with you, or if you read the book and you want to reach out to Anthony, go ahead and do that. Anthony, thank you so much for sharing your story today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. You take care, Jason.
Yeah. You too. Bye.